You wake up tomorrow morning in what you believe to be the freest society that has ever existed. You can vote for your leaders, speak your mind without fear of imprisonment, choose your career, your partner, your beliefs. You scroll through your phone, consuming whatever information appeals to you. You buy what you want, go where you please, think what feels right. This is freedom, isn't it? This is what countless generations fought and died for, the right to choose your own path. But here's where the story takes a disturbing turn. Imagine discovering that every choice you make, every political opinion you hold, every product you buy, every relationship you pursue, every dream you chase, has been subtly shaped by forces you never noticed. Not by a dictator with an iron fist, not by secret police knocking at your door, but by something far more insidious, your own freedom itself. The very liberty you cherish has become the invisible chain that binds you, and the most terrifying part is that you feel completely in control while it happens. You see, there's a paradox hidden at the heart of democratic freedom that no one talks about in civics class or philosophy seminars. It's the uncomfortable truth that freedom, real, unlimited freedom, can become its own prison. When you're free to choose anything, you become vulnerable to having your choices made for you in ways so subtle, so psychologically sophisticated, that you'll fight anyone who suggests you're not in control. Think about it. When did you last make a truly independent decision? Not just a choice between pre-selected options, but a decision that emerged purely from your own deepest values, untouched by advertising, social pressure, algorithmic manipulation, or cultural conditioning. Can you even remember what your authentic preferences feel like, stripped of all external influence? This isn't about conspiracy theories or shadowy cabals pulling strings. This is about something far more profound and disturbing. How the architecture of democratic freedom itself can be weaponized against the very people it's meant to liberate. How the illusion of choice can be more powerful than the absence of choice ever was. Consider this unsettling possibility. What if the greatest threat to human freedom isn't totalitarian oppression, but the corruption of freedom itself? What if democracy's greatest weakness isn't that it gives you too little power, but that it gives you just enough power to feel in control while rendering you completely manipulable? You live in an age where you have more choices than any human in history. Thousands of TV channels, millions of products, countless career paths, endless information at your fingertips. Yet anxiety, depression, and a sense of meaninglessness have reached epidemic proportions. People feel more isolated, more confused about their identity, and more politically polarized than ever before. They have infinite freedom to choose, yet they feel increasingly powerless. Why does unlimited choice lead to paralysis? Why does perfect freedom breed perfect confusion? Why do the freest societies often produce the most psychologically tortured individuals? The answer lies in a psychological trap so elegant, so perfectly camouflaged, that recognizing it requires you to question everything you've been taught about freedom, choice, and self-determination. It requires you to confront the possibility that your most cherished beliefs about your own autonomy might be the very things keeping you enslaved. But here's what makes this particularly dangerous. The moment you begin to see this trap, you realize you can't simply escape it by making different choices. The trap isn't in your choices. It's in the very framework that makes choice possible. It's woven into the fabric of democratic society itself, embedded in the psychological architecture of modern life. This isn't a problem you can vote your way out of, buy your way out of, or think your way out of using conventional wisdom. It requires a fundamental shift in how you understand the relationship between freedom and control, between choice and authenticity, between democracy and human flourishing. The question that will haunt everything that follows is this: if your freedom can be turned against you so subtly that you'll defend your own manipulation as liberty, what does real freedom actually look like? And once you see the trap clearly, can you ever feel truly free again? To understand how freedom becomes its own prison, you must first grasp a fundamental truth about human psychology that democratic societies desperately want to ignore. Most people cannot handle unlimited choice without losing their minds. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about the collective unconscious, the shared psychological patterns that shape human behavior beneath our conscious awareness. He recognized that when individuals are severed from traditional structures and cultural anchors, they don't become more authentic. They become more susceptible to mass psychological manipulation. The very freedom that was supposed to liberate their true selves instead leaves them psychologically adrift, desperately seeking something, anything, to tell them who they are. This is the first crack in the foundation of democratic freedom. the assumption that more choice automatically equals more authenticity. In reality, unlimited choice often produces what psychologists call choice paralysis, a state where the abundance of options becomes so overwhelming that people either freeze completely or make decisions based on superficial, external criteria rather than deep personal values. But here's where it gets more sinister. Friedrich Nietzsche predicted this psychological crisis when he declared that God is dead, meaning that traditional sources of meaning and authority were collapsing. He warned that this wouldn't lead to human liberation, but to nihilism and the rise of what he called the herd mentality. Without transcendent values to guide them, people would unconsciously gravitate toward whatever ideology or system promised to restore meaning, even if it enslaved them in the process. Think about your own life. How many of your deepest beliefs did you consciously choose through careful reasoning, and how many did you absorb unconsciously from your social environment? Your political views, your career aspirations, your relationship patterns, your consumer preferences, trace them back to their origins, and you'll find that most emerged not from deliberate choice, but from a complex web of social influences that operated below your conscious awareness. This is what Arthur Schopenhauer meant when he said that a man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants. Your desires themselves are shaped by forces beyond your control, which means your free choices are expressions of unfree wants. You're like someone locked in a room who feels perfectly free because you get to choose which corner to sit in, never noticing that someone else built the room and installed the lighting to influence where you'd want to sit. The psychological roots of this trap run even deeper. Viktor Frankl, writing from his experience in Nazi concentration camps, observed that humans' primary drive isn't pleasure or power, it's meaning. When people lose a sense of transcendent purpose, they become psychologically vulnerable to whatever force can provide them with a substitute meaning, no matter how destructive or artificial. Democratic societies have inadvertently created the perfect conditions for this psychological exploitation. By dismantling traditional sources of meaning, religion, cultural traditions, stable communities, clear social roles, and replacing them with the abstract ideal of individual choice, they've left people psychologically hungry for direction. The result is that people become unconsciously desperate for someone or something to tell them what to want, what to value, what to believe. This desperation is then exploited by what Aldous Huxley called the manipulation of consent. Unlike the crude propaganda of totalitarian regimes, democratic manipulation works by giving people the illusion that they're choosing freely while subtly engineering the context in which those choices are made. You feel completely autonomous while being psychologically steered toward predetermined outcomes. Consider how this plays out in your daily life. You wake up and choose to check your phone, but the apps on that phone have been designed by teams of neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists specifically to hijack your attention and dopamine systems. You choose your political opinions, but those opinions have been shaped by algorithms that show you information calculated to confirm your existing biases and increase your emotional engagement. You choose your career path, but that path was influenced by educational systems, social expectations, and economic pressures that operated on you long before you were old enough to make conscious decisions. The most insidious part is that questioning this system triggers a psychological defense mechanism. Because your identity is built around the belief that you're a free, autonomous individual making rational choices, any suggestion that your choices are being manipulated feels like an attack on your very selfhood. You'll fight to defend your right to make choices that were never really yours to begin with. Jean-Paul Sartre captured this psychological trap when he wrote about bad faith, the human tendency to deny our own freedom and responsibility by pretending we have no choice, while simultaneously claiming to be freely choosing our predetermined path. In democratic societies, this bad faith takes a particularly sophisticated form. People claim to be exercising ultimate freedom, while unconsciously surrendering that freedom to whoever can most skillfully manipulate the context of their choices. This creates a feedback loop of psychological dependency. The more confused and overwhelmed people become by unlimited choice, the more they unconsciously crave external guidance. The more they receive that guidance through subtle manipulation, the less capable they become of genuine, autonomous thinking. The less autonomous they become, the more they need to believe they're freely choosing everything, because the alternative, admitting they're being controlled, is too psychologically threatening to face. You're trapped in a system that has learned to control you by convincing you that you're in control, and your own psychological need to feel autonomous has become the very mechanism through which that control operates. The question becomes, If your freedom is the weapon being used against you, how can you possibly fight back? The psychological trap of corrupted freedom doesn't just affect your individual choices. It rewrites the entire fabric of reality around you, creating a world where authentic human experience becomes increasingly impossible to access or even recognize. Look around at the society this paradox has created. You live in an era of unprecedented material prosperity and technological capability, yet rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide continue to climb. People have more educational opportunities than ever before, yet they report feeling more confused about their purpose and identity. Democratic participation reaches new heights of accessibility, yet citizens feel more powerless and disconnected from meaningful political influence than in generations. This isn't coincidence. It's the inevitable result of what happens when human psychology collides with unlimited choice in a context designed to exploit that collision. Consider how this plays out in your cognitive architecture. Your brain evolved to make decisions in small tribal groups with limited options and clear consequences. When faced with the modern deluge of choices, your neural systems become overwhelmed and default to what psychologists call cognitive shortcuts or heuristics. You start making decisions not based on careful analysis of what's truly best for you, but based on whatever mental shortcut feels most immediately satisfying or familiar. These cognitive shortcuts become the entry points through which your decision-making process gets hijacked. Marketers know that when people are overwhelmed by choice, they'll gravitate toward whatever option requires the least mental effort, usually the one that's been positioned as the obvious or default choice through careful environmental design. Political operatives understand that when citizens are confused by complex policy debates, they'll vote based on tribal identity markers rather than careful analysis of actual consequences. The result is a society where people believe they're making independent choices while actually following predictable psychological patterns that can be mapped, measured, and manipulated with scientific precision. You think you're freely choosing your breakfast cereal, but a team of neuroscientists studied your brain scans to determine exactly which package design would trigger your purchase impulse. You think you're freely forming your political opinions, but those opinions were shaped by carefully crafted messages designed to activate your existing biases and emotional triggers. This manipulation operates through what researchers call choice architecture, the deliberate structuring of decision-making contexts to guide people toward predetermined outcomes while preserving their sense of autonomy. The grocery store layout that guides you past the most profitable items. The social media algorithm that shows you content calculated to keep you engaged and emotionally reactive. The political primary system that presents you with pre-selected candidates who all operate within acceptable parameters of the existing power structure. But the most profound consequence isn't just that your choices are being influenced, it's that your capacity for authentic choice is being systematically eroded. When you're constantly making decisions based on external manipulation rather than internal wisdom, you lose touch with what genuine preference feels like. Your authentic self, the part of you that knows what you actually want and value, becomes buried under layers of conditioned responses and manufactured desires. This creates what researchers call preference construction, the phenomenon where people don't actually have stable preferences waiting to be discovered, but instead construct their preferences on the spot based on whatever contextual cues are most salient in the moment. Your political views, consumer preferences, even your romantic attractions become fluid and contextual rather than grounded in deep, stable values. The modern equivalent of this kind of rebellion requires developing what could be called conscious non-participation, the deliberate withdrawal of your psychological energy from systems designed to manipulate it. This isn't about becoming a hermit or dropping out of society entirely, but about becoming extremely selective about where you invest your attention and mental energy. Start with your information diet. Instead of trying to consume better news or more balanced perspectives, recognize that the entire attention economy is designed to keep you in a state of reactive engagement. The rebellion is to drastically reduce your consumption of engineered information and instead spend time in unmediated contact with reality, nature, direct human relationships, hands-on creative work, physical challenges that require your full presence. This creates space for what psychologists call intrinsic motivation to emerge, desires and values that arise from your actual experience rather than from external programming. When you're not constantly being told what to want, you begin to rediscover what you actually want. When you're not being fed predigested opinions, you begin to develop your own capacity for independent thought. But perhaps the most radical aspect of this rebellion is learning to embrace what could be called productive constraint. Instead of seeking unlimited choice, you begin to voluntarily limit your options in ways that serve your authentic development. You choose one creative practice and go deep instead of sampling many superficially. You commit to one community and build real relationships instead of maintaining hundreds of shallow social media connections. You focus on developing a few core skills instead of being perpetually distracted by new possibilities. This seems paradoxical, using constraint to create freedom, but it's actually how all meaningful human development works. The master craftsperson becomes free through disciplined practice within the constraints of their medium. The committed relationship becomes a space for authentic intimacy through the constraint of exclusivity. The spiritual practitioner finds liberation through the constraint of disciplined attention. The key insight is that authentic freedom isn't the absence of all constraints. It's the conscious choice of which constraints to accept based on your deepest values rather than external manipulation. When you choose your own constraints based on your authentic development, you're no longer trapped by the artificial choices presented to you by systems designed to exploit your psychology. This kind of rebellion spreads through modeling rather than through argument. When people see someone living with genuine autonomy, making decisions based on clear internal compass rather than reactive responses to external stimuli, it reminds them of possibilities they had forgotten existed. Your authentic freedom becomes a form of resistance that others can feel even if they can't immediately articulate what they're feeling. But this raises the final question: what does it actually feel like to live with this kind of authentic freedom? What's on the other side of the psychological archaeology, the conscious non-participation, the voluntary constraint? What emerges when you finally escape the freedom trap? The ultimate truth about freedom, the realization that will fundamentally alter how you see reality itself, is this: authentic freedom has never been about choice at all. It's about the dissolution of the chooser. When you finally excavate your way through all the layers of conditioning, manipulation, and artificial preference, you don't find some pure, essential self making perfectly autonomous choices. You find something far more profound and liberating: the recognition that the anxious, grasping entity that was desperately trying to choose correctly never actually existed in the first place. This is the deepest level of the freedom paradox. The very self that feels trapped by manipulated choice is itself a construction, a psychological fiction created by the same forces that benefit from your sense of separation, anxiety, and endless seeking. The ego that wants to be free, that feels victimized by manipulation, that seeks to make better choices, is actually the primary mechanism through which the manipulation operates. Think about it. Who exactly is it that feels frustrated by unlimited choice? Who is overwhelmed by the complexity of modern decisions? Who feels manipulated and controlled? It's always the same psychological entity, the one that experiences itself as separate from the world around it, constantly trying to navigate that world in order to get something it needs or avoid something it fears. But what if that entity, that sense of being a separate self making choices in a hostile or manipulative world, is itself the ultimate illusion? What if the deepest freedom comes not from making better choices, but from seeing through the illusion of the chooser entirely? This isn't merely philosophical speculation. Neuroscience research has revealed that what we experience as free will and choice are actually post hoc rationalizations created by the brain to explain actions that were initiated by unconscious processes milliseconds before conscious awareness kicks in. The experience of being a chooser is a story the mind tells itself about processes that are actually happening spontaneously, beyond the control of any central command center. When you truly understand this, not just intellectually but experientially, something extraordinary happens. The anxious weight of endless choosing begins to dissolve. The fear of making the wrong decision loses its grip. The compulsive need to defend your autonomy relaxes. What remains is a natural responsiveness to life that flows from wisdom rather than anxiety, from clarity rather than confusion. This is what the great spiritual traditions have always pointed toward when they spoke of liberation. The Buddhist concept of no self isn't a nihilistic denial of your existence. It's the recognition that what you really are is far vaster and more free than the small, anxious chooser you thought you were. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, or effortless action, isn't about passivity. It's about action that arises from harmony with natural intelligence, rather than from the desperate calculations of a separate self trying to control outcomes. When you live from this understanding, your relationship to the manipulated world around you transforms completely. You're no longer reactive to the attempts to control your choices because you're no longer identified with the entity that was being controlled. Political propaganda, advertising, social pressure, these forces lose their psychological grip because they were designed to hook a sense of self that you now see through. This doesn't mean you become passive or withdrawn from the world. Instead, your engagement becomes more spontaneous, more creative, more genuinely helpful. No longer driven by the anxiety of an ego trying to protect itself or get what it wants, you're free to respond to situations with genuine wisdom and compassion. Your actions arise from love rather than fear, from abundance rather than scarcity, from connection rather than separation. The choices you make from this state aren't really choices in the conventional sense. They're natural expressions of wisdom meeting circumstance. Like water flowing downhill or a plant growing towards sunlight, your responses to life become effortless expressions of your deepest nature rather than anxious calculations by a worried mind. This is perhaps why the greatest individuals in history, those who created the most positive change, who displayed the most authentic freedom, often described their most important actions as things that happened through them rather than by them. They became clear channels for natural intelligence to express itself rather than separate agents trying to impose their will on the world. But here's the final paradox. This ultimate freedom can't be achieved by trying to achieve it. The very effort to escape the illusion of choice strengthens the chooser who wants to escape. This liberation arises naturally when you simply see clearly what's actually happening, when you observe your own mind with enough clarity and compassion that the fictional boundaries between self and world begin to dissolve on their own. You don't have to do anything to be free. You already are free. The prison was always just a dream of separation, a nightmare of endless choosing, a fiction of isolated selfhood trying to navigate a hostile world. When you wake up from that dream, what remains is what was always there, the natural freedom of existence itself, expressing itself through the temporary pattern of experience you call your life. The democracy you thought you needed to fix was never broken. The choices you thought you needed to perfect were never imperfect. The freedom you thought you needed to find was never lost. You were always the freedom you were seeking, expressing itself through the beautiful, temporary dance of human experience. What remains now is not a choice, but a recognition. Not a decision, but an awakening. Not a path to freedom, but the realization that you never left home. The question isn't how to be free. The question is, can you recognize the freedom that's looking through your eyes right now?